Imagine it's February 1946. You're standing in a bombed-out street in Berlin. Snow is falling, the war is over, but the suffering has only begun. You've survived 5 years of Allied bombing. You've survived the Soviet assault on the city. You've kept your family alive through rationing, through hiding, through nights in cellars while the world collapsed above you. And now you have gold. Real gold. Coins your grandmother sewed into the lining of a coat before the war began. You've guarded them for 6 years. You've never told anyone, not your neighbors, not even your closest friends. You knew someday this gold would save your family. That day has arrived. Your daughter is sick. She needs medicine. She needs food. She needs heat. You walk 3 miles through the rubble to find a man selling bread on the black market. You approach him carefully. You reach into your pocket. You produce a gold coin. The man looks at it. He shakes his head. He doesn't want your gold. What he wants is the pack of American cigarettes the GI down the street traded for a family heirloom yesterday. What he wants is the bottle of schnapps your neighbor has been hiding. What he wants is the can of penicillin powder you couldn't possibly possess. Your gold in that moment is a beautiful piece of metal. Nothing more. Let that sink in. There is a belief, deeply embedded in the collective consciousness of anyone who has ever worried about economic collapse, that gold is the ultimate hedge. That when paper currencies fail, when governments fall, when the machinery of modern commerce grinds to a halt, gold will be there, reliable, eternal. The one true money that has held value for 5,000 years. This belief is not entirely wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete, because in every currency collapse in documented history, in every societal breakdown, in every period when normal economic activity ceased and humans reverted to direct exchange, gold was consistently outperformed in immediate purchasing power by a handful of mundane practical items. Items you could hold in your hand, items you could consume, items that address the immediate, non-negotiable needs of human survival. This isn't theory. It's documented history. It happened in Germany after both world wars. It happened in the Soviet Union during its collapse. It happened in Argentina, in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, in Yugoslavia, in Greece. The pattern is identical every time. And once you understand why, you will never think about monetary collapse the same way again. The standard narrative about currency collapse goes something like this. Governments print too much money. Inflation rises. Paper currency loses value. People lose faith in government-issued money. They flee to hard assets, gold, silver, precious metals. These become the new medium of exchange. Those who hold gold survive. Those who don't suffer. This narrative is taught in economics courses. It's repeated in financial media. It's the foundation of an entire industry of gold dealers, precious metals IRAs, and doomsday preparation marketing. And it captures roughly half of what actually happens. The half it misses is the most important half. When a currency collapses, something happens before people revert to gold as a medium of exchange. They stop exchanging altogether. The economy doesn't immediately reorganize around a new form of money. It fragments. It localizes. It becomes a series of desperate, immediate transactions between individuals who have things and individuals who need things. And in those transactions, the currency isn't determined by historical precedent or metallurgical properties. It's determined by one variable, immediacy of need. A mother with a starving child does not need gold. She needs calories. She needs them today. She needs them now. A man with an infected wound does not need silver. He needs antibiotics. He needs them before the infection reaches his bloodstream. A family freezing in an unheated apartment does not need precious metals. They need fuel. They need a way to create heat before hypothermia sets in. Gold cannot address any of these needs directly. Gold requires a functioning market to translate into goods. It requires a buyer who has excess supply and wants to store long-term value. It requires stability. In the first weeks and months of a currency collapse, there is no stability. There is only survival. And survival has a very specific hierarchy of needs. In 1943, Abraham Maslow published a paper that would become one of the most influential frameworks in psychology. His hierarchy of needs placed physiological survival at the base: food, water, warmth, rest. Only after these needs were met could humans focus on safety, belonging, esteem, and finally, self-actualization. What Maslow described for individuals applies equally to economies. When an economy collapses, the collective focus of all participants narrows to the base of the pyramid. Survival needs dominate all transactions. Anything that addresses survival directly becomes currency. Anything that doesn't, regardless of its historical value, becomes secondary. Gold sits at the top of Maslow's pyramid. It represents stored value, future security, long-term wealth preservation. It is, in essence, a tool of self-actualization, a way to project power and stability into an uncertain future. But you cannot eat gold. You cannot burn gold for warmth. You cannot inject gold to fight an infection. You cannot drink gold when the water supply fails. In the immediate aftermath of collapse, gold is a promissory note written in a language no one is currently speaking. The items that become currency are the items that address the base of the pyramid, and history tells us, with remarkable consistency, exactly which items those are. Let us return to Germany, not to 1946, but to the economic forensics that followed. After the war, occupied Germany operated on what economists would later call the cigarette standard. American cigarettes, distributed to U.S. soldiers as part of their rations, became the de facto currency of the German economy. This was not symbolic. It was measured. In 1947, the Economic Research Department of the American occupation government documented that a single American cigarette could purchase goods that would have cost 12 Reichsmarks at official prices. A carton of cigarettes could buy a man's suit, 2 cartons could buy a camera, a case of cigarettes could buy a small motorcycle. Gold, by contrast, traded at a discount. A 1947 survey of black market prices in Frankfurt found that gold coins traded at roughly 60% of their pre-war purchasing power, while cigarettes traded at multiples of their production cost. Why? Because cigarettes addressed 2 immediate needs. First, they were consumable. A smoker needed them physiologically. Nicotine addiction was widespread. Withdrawal was painful. Cigarettes weren't a luxury. For millions of people, they were a necessity. Second, they were divisible. You could make small transactions. You could break a pack. You could trade a single cigarette for a small favor. Gold, by contrast, was chunky. A gold coin was too valuable for buying bread. There was no way to make change. The cigarette economy lasted until the currency reform of 1948, when the Deutsche Mark was introduced and confidence in paper money was restored. But for 3 years, cigarettes were worth more than gold. This is not an anomaly. This is the pattern. The first item: tobacco and nicotine products. The cigarette economy of Germany was not unique. In every prison system in the world, cigarettes serve as currency. In the Soviet Gulag system, documented by Alexander Solzhenitsyn and others, tobacco was the universal medium of exchange. In American prisons today, after smoking bans made cigarettes contraband, they became even more valuable. A single cigarette in a federal prison can trade for goods worth $10 or $15 at commissary prices. The mechanism is identical everywhere. Tobacco addresses a physiological need that is not negotiable. It is lightweight, portable, divisible, recognizable, and consumed upon use, ensuring constant demand. In Venezuela's ongoing economic collapse, which began accelerating in 2016, cigarettes became scarce within months of the currency crisis. Black market prices for a single pack reached the equivalent of several weeks' wages at official exchange rates. Those who had stockpiled tobacco could trade it for food, medicine, fuel, and protection. The same pattern emerged in Yugoslavia during the 1990s, in Argentina during the 2001 crisis, in Zimbabwe during the hyperinflation of 2008. Tobacco is not healthy. It is not morally virtuous. It is not a wise consumption choice, but it is, historically, one of the most reliable stores of immediate value during economic collapse. This is not advice. This is documentation. The second item: alcohol and distilled spirits. If tobacco addresses nicotine addiction, alcohol addresses something even more fundamental. It addresses pain. In every societal collapse, physical pain becomes ubiquitous. Medical care becomes unavailable. Injuries go untreated. Dental problems become agonizing. Chronic conditions that were managed by modern medicine become unbearable. Alcohol is the oldest analgesic in human history, but that is only its first function. Alcohol is also a disinfectant. High-proof spirits can sterilize wounds, clean instruments, and prevent infections. In the absence of modern medical supplies, alcohol becomes a medical necessity. Alcohol is also a sedative. It reduces anxiety. It allows sleep. In the psychological chaos of collapse, this function becomes critical. People trade for alcohol not because they are irresponsible, but because they are desperate for a few hours of mental relief. And alcohol is also a preservative, a solvent, a fuel in extreme cases. The historical record is unambiguous. In Soviet Russia, vodka was currency. Under Stalin, under Khrushchev, under Brezhnev, the state controlled vodka production and used it as an instrument of social control, but the people used it as an instrument of exchange. A bottle of vodka could purchase labor, loyalty, access, information. In post-Soviet Russia during the 1990s, when the ruble collapsed and salaries went unpaid for months, vodka was again the universal medium. Factories paid workers in vodka. Farmers traded harvests for vodka. The entire economy ran, in part, on distilled spirits. In Bosnia during the siege of Sarajevo, which lasted from 1992 to 1996, alcohol was one of the most valuable trade goods in the city. People who had stockpiled brandy, whiskey, or homemade rakia could trade it for food, ammunition, and safe passage. The same pattern appeared in Argentina in 2001, in Greece during the austerity crisis, in Venezuela today. Distilled spirits have another critical advantage. They don't expire. A bottle of whiskey stored properly will last decades, centuries potentially. This makes it superior to almost any other consumable as a long-term store of value. Gold lasts forever, but you cannot drink gold when you need to numb the pain of an untreated injury. Whiskey lasts nearly as long, and you can. The third item, antibiotics and medical supplies. Now we arrive at the most disturbing category. In modern developed economies, we take for granted that infections can be treated. A cut becomes infected, you go to a doctor, you receive antibiotics, you recover. The entire process is routine, affordable, and unremarkable. This was not always the case. Before the discovery of penicillin in 1928 and its mass production beginning in 1943, minor infections killed routinely. A scratch from a rose thorn could lead to sepsis. A dental abscess could be fatal. Pneumonia was a death sentence more often than not. We have lived in the antibiotic era for less than a century, and that era depends entirely on the functioning of modern pharmaceutical supply chains. In every societal collapse, those supply chains break. In Venezuela, by 2018, basic antibiotics had disappeared from pharmacies. Amoxicillin, ciprofloxacin, azithromycin, gone. The black market price for a single course of antibiotics reached hundreds of dollars in a country where the minimum wage had collapsed to less than $5 per month. People died from infections that would have been trivially treatable 3 years earlier. Those who had antibiotics could trade them for almost anything. Food, fuel, protection, gold. Yes, gold. There are documented cases from Venezuela of people trading gold jewelry for courses of antibiotics, a gold necklace for amoxicillin, a gold ring for insulin. The same pattern appeared in post-Soviet Russia, where the collapse of the healthcare system meant that those with access to Western medicines held enormous power. In Yugoslavia, during the wars of the 1990s, medical supplies were the most valuable category of contraband. This extends beyond antibiotics. Insulin for diabetics, blood pressure medication for those with hypertension, pain medication, anti-malarial drugs in tropical regions, epinephrine for allergic reactions. Any medication that someone needs to survive becomes, by definition, more valuable than gold to that person. And in a collapsed economy, there are millions of such people. The implications are uncomfortable, but they are historically consistent. The fourth item, fuel and energy sources. In January 2022, I produced an analysis of energy dependency and its political implications. The principle identified there applies with equal force to economic collapse. Modern civilization runs on energy, not money, not gold, not information. Energy, specifically concentrated, portable, stored energy. Gasoline, diesel, propane, natural gas, firewood in pre-industrial contexts. These are the inputs that make everything else possible. When currency collapses, energy doesn't become less important. It becomes more important because energy cannot be printed. It cannot be inflated. It cannot be created by government decree. It must be extracted, refined, transported, and stored. And all of those processes require functioning infrastructure. In Venezuela, gasoline became effectively priceless by 2019. The country sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world. It should be swimming in fuel, but refinery capacity collapsed. Import systems broke down. Distribution networks failed. Gasoline became a black market commodity more valuable, liter for liter, than the same volume of gold. People waited in lines for days to fill their tanks. Those with jerry cans of stored fuel could trade them for months' worth of food. In Bosnia during the siege, firewood became currency. The winters were brutal. Heating systems had failed. People froze to death in their apartments. Those who could provide fuel, any fuel, could name their price. In post-Soviet Russia, control of fuel distribution was one of the primary mechanisms by which oligarchs consolidated power. Fuel was the choke point through which all other economic activity had to pass. The pattern extends throughout history. In any environment where energy becomes scarce, those who control energy control everything. Gold cannot heat your home. Gold cannot power your vehicle. Gold cannot cook your food. A gallon of gasoline can. The fifth item, seeds, tools, and productive capacity. The final category is the most subtle and the most powerful. The items we have discussed so far are consumables: tobacco, alcohol, medicine, fuel. They are used and then they are gone. Their value derives from their scarcity and their immediate utility. But in a prolonged collapse, a different category of goods emerges as supreme, the category of production: seeds, hand tools, water filtration equipment, fishing supplies, ammunition for hunting, livestock. Anything that allows someone to produce the necessities of survival, rather than merely trade for them, becomes geometrically more valuable as collapse extends. In Zimbabwe, during the hyperinflation of 2007-2008, the price of seeds for staple crops rose faster than any other category of goods except medicine. A kilogram of maize seed was worth more than its weight in gold at official exchange rates, not because the seed was rare, but because the seed represented future production. It represented food security for an entire growing season. The same dynamic appeared in Venezuela, in Argentina. In every case where collapse lasted long enough for people to realize that trading for survival was not sustainable. Gold cannot grow food. Seeds can. And in a world where the food supply chain has broken, the ability to grow food is the ultimate form of wealth. This category extends to tools, a functioning grain mill, a working water pump, a solar panel that can charge batteries, a wood-burning stove. These items do not get consumed. They produce value over time. They are capital goods in the truest sense. Those who possess productive capacity in a collapsed economy are not merely wealthy. They are sovereign. In every collapse, a transfer of wealth occurs. Not from rich to poor, not from poor to rich, not along any of the familiar axes we use to analyze economic distribution. The transfer moves from those who stored value abstractly to those who stored value concretely, from those who held paper to those who held goods, from those who trusted institutions to those who trusted tangible utility, from those who prepared for a future that looked like the past to those who prepared for a future that looked different. This is not a moral judgment. Many of those who benefited were simply lucky. They happened to have the right goods for the right reasons. They were smokers who had extra cigarettes. They were diabetics who had stockpiled insulin. They were farmers who had seeds. But some were deliberate. Some understood before the collapse that the map of value would change. They positioned themselves accordingly. In every collapse, these people exist. They are rarely the traditionally wealthy. They are rarely the financially sophisticated. They are rarely the people who read economics textbooks or follow financial news. They are often the people on the margins, the suspicious, the paranoid, the people who never trusted the system in the first place, and in the aftermath of collapse they find themselves holding the real currency. The people who paid the price were the people who did everything right, by conventional standards. They saved money, they invested prudently, they followed the rules, they trusted the institutions that society told them to trust, banks, governments, pension systems, insurance companies. When those institutions failed, their savings evaporated. But even those who fled to gold often found themselves disadvantaged. They had prepared for the wrong kind of crisis. They had prepared for a crisis where commerce continued, just with different money. They had prepared for a crisis where the problem was the medium of exchange, not the exchange itself. What they got was a crisis where exchange itself became difficult, where the challenge was not finding a universally accepted currency, but finding anyone willing to trade at all, where the immediate needs of survival dominated all transactions. Gold, in that environment, was a solution to a problem no one was currently having. The people with tobacco, alcohol, medicine, and fuel were solving the problems people were actually facing. There is a cruel irony here. The most prudent, most farsighted, most responsible members of society often suffered most in collapse. They had done everything society told them to do. Society failed them anyway. The people who survived best were often those who had never fully trusted society in the first place. Let us examine this quantitatively. In a functioning economy, the value of a good is determined by supply and demand curves intersecting in a market with many buyers and many sellers. Prices reach equilibrium, information flows, arbitrage opportunities close. In a collapsed economy, none of this applies. There are no markets. There are individual transactions. Each transaction is unique. Each price is negotiated between a single buyer and a single seller. In this environment, value is determined by a different formula. Value equals necessity divided by availability multiplied by urgency. Gold fails this formula on two variables. First, gold is not necessary for survival. It is necessary for wealth preservation, for long-term security, for eventual recovery, but not for surviving today, not for surviving this week. Second, gold is not urgent. Its value proposition is precisely that it will hold value over time. But when you are starving, when you're freezing, when you are infected, time is the one thing you do not have. The items that score highest on this formula are items that are necessary, scarce, and urgent simultaneously. Antibiotics when you have an infection, fuel when you are freezing, food when you are starving, cigarettes when you are in withdrawal, alcohol when you are in pain. These items max out the formula. Gold does not. This is not a criticism of gold. This is a description of the mechanism by which barter economies assign value. The mechanism does not care about 5,000 years of monetary history. It does not care about scarcity or aesthetics or tradition. It cares about one thing. What do you need right now? There's another mechanism at work. In economics, liquidity refers to how easily an asset can be converted into purchasing power without significant loss of value. Cash is highly liquid. Real estate is not. You can spend $1 in seconds. Selling a house takes months. Gold in a functioning economy is reasonably liquid. There are dealers. There are markets. There are established prices. You can convert gold to cash within hours. In a collapsed economy, gold becomes illiquid. There are no dealers. There are no markets. There are no established prices. There's only you, standing in a bombed-out street trying to find someone who will accept your gold coin for bread. Most people will not accept it, not because they don't believe gold is valuable, they believe it, but because they have no use for it. They cannot eat it, they cannot burn it, they cannot use it, and they have no confidence that they can find someone else who will trade for it before their own survival needs overwhelm them. Gold in collapse becomes an asset you cannot sell. Meanwhile, the practical items remain perfectly liquid. Everyone needs food, everyone needs medicine, everyone needs warmth, everyone needs pain relief. These items sell immediately at any price the seller chooses to demand. The liquidity differential between gold and practical goods can be enormous. In some collapses, gold owners have reported waiting weeks to find a buyer for a single coin. During those same weeks, people with cigarettes completed dozens of transactions per day. Time is not neutral in collapse, time kills. The asset you can trade today is infinitely more valuable than the asset you might be able to trade next month. Let us examine one more case study. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. 15 republics became independent nations overnight. The ruble, which had been the universal currency across 1/6 of the Earth's landmass, became worthless. What happened next is documented extensively by journalists, economists, and survivors. The first wave of response was flight to hard currency. Dollars, Deutsche Marks, anything foreign, anything that might hold value. But foreign currency was scarce. Most Soviet citizens had never possessed it. They had lived their entire lives in a closed system where foreign exchange was illegal. The second wave was flight to goods, not gold. Goods, televisions, refrigerators, furniture, anything that could be stored and traded later. But these goods were heavy, bulky, difficult to transport. The third wave was flight to consumables. And this is where the pattern we have discussed emerged. Vodka became currency, cigarettes became currency, canned food became currency, gasoline became currency. Medicine, where it could be obtained, became the most valuable of all. Gold existed in the Soviet Union. The state had been accumulating it for decades. Individual citizens had been hiding it for generations. Gold coins, gold jewelry, gold dental work. But in the chaos of 1991 and 1992, gold was not the preferred medium of exchange. It was too valuable for small transactions. It was too suspicious to display openly. It attracted the wrong kind of attention. The black market ran on consumables. A doctor in Moscow interviewed in 1993 described trading a gold ring for a course of antibiotics for his daughter. The antibiotics had a manufacturing cost of perhaps $2. The gold ring was worth several hundred, but his daughter was dying. The calculation was simple. This was not an isolated case. This was the norm. There is an important nuance to add. Everything we have discussed applies to the acute phase of collapse. The first weeks, the first months, possibly the first year or two. In the acute phase, survival goods dominate, but collapses do not last forever. Eventually, stability returns, new currencies emerge, markets reconstitute, normal economic activity resumes. When this happens, the value hierarchy inverts. Gold, which was illiquid and impractical during the chaos, becomes extremely valuable during recovery. Those who held gold through the collapse find themselves wealthy in the new system. Those who consumed their goods find themselves with nothing. This is the paradox of collapse preparation. The items that save your life during the acute phase are the items you consume. The items that make you wealthy during the recovery phase are the items that remain. Gold is the recovery asset. Consumables are the survival asset. Both are necessary, but they serve different purposes at different times. The mistake most people make is preparing for only one phase. They hoard gold and find themselves unable to survive the acute phase, or they hoard consumables and find themselves poor when stability returns. The historical record suggests that those who survived best were those who held both, and who understood which to use when. Now we arrive at the core constraint. In any collapse scenario, the fundamental problem is not what you own. The fundamental problem is timing. When do you trade your gold for survival goods? Too early, and you give up long-term wealth unnecessarily? Too late, and you die holding an asset no one will accept. When do you stop consuming your survival goods and start preserving them? Too early, and you suffer needlessly. Too late, and you have nothing left when stability returns. These timing decisions cannot be made in advance. They require real-time assessment of a situation that is, by definition, chaotic and unpredictable. This is why preparation is ultimately limited. You can stockpile goods, you can acquire gold, you can learn skills, you can build relationships with people who have what you lack. But you cannot know in advance exactly how a collapse will unfold. You cannot know how long the acute phase will last. You cannot know when recovery will begin. You can only build optionality, the ability to respond to conditions as they emerge, rather than committing in advance to a single strategy. Those who build optionality survive. Those who commit to a single strategy depend on luck, and luck in collapse runs out quickly. I'm often asked why I analyze these historical patterns. The answer is not to predict the future. No one can predict the future. The answer is to understand the structure of systems. Because systems have patterns, systems have constraints, systems have breaking points that can be identified in advance, even if the timing cannot. The global financial system today carries levels of debt that have no historical precedent. The United States federal debt exceeds $34 trillion. Global debt exceeds $300 trillion. The ratio of debt to productive output is higher than at any point in recorded history. This does not mean collapse is imminent. It means the system is constrained. It means the historical patterns we have examined are not merely academic exercises. They are potential futures. And the people who understand those patterns, who understand what becomes valuable when the standard assumptions fail, are better positioned than those who do not. This is not about fear. This is about forensics. Understanding how systems have failed in the past allows us to recognize similar dynamics if they emerge again. The people in Weimar Germany, in post-war Berlin, in Soviet Russia, in Yugoslavia, in Venezuela, they did not see the collapse coming. Or rather, some did, but they prepared incorrectly. They prepared for a world that looked like the world they knew, just with different money. They did not prepare for a world where the rules themselves changed, where gold lost its liquidity, where cigarettes became currency, where a bottle of antibiotics was worth more than a gold bar. Those who understand the pattern are less likely to repeat the error. This is historical and educational analysis. Nothing in this script constitutes financial advice, investment advice, or a recommendation to buy, sell, or store any particular asset. The patterns described are based on documented historical events and should not be interpreted as predictions about future events. Every historical collapse had unique characteristics. Future events, if they occur, will have unique characteristics as well. The only appropriate preparation is understanding, not prediction. Let us return to where we began. Berlin, February 1946. A man with gold standing in the snow, trying to trade for bread. He did everything right. He saved. He preserved. He protected his family's wealth through years of war. And in the moment of greatest need, his gold was not enough. Not because gold is worthless. Gold is not worthless, but because value is contextual. What something is worth depends on where you are, when you are, and what is happening around you. In a stable economy with functioning markets and predictable supply chains, gold is an excellent store of value. In the acute phase of collapse, when survival needs dominate all transactions, when there are no markets, no dealers, no established prices, the items that directly address human survival become the real currency. Tobacco, alcohol, medicine, fuel, productive capacity. These are not glamorous, they are not beautiful, they are not symbols of wealth and power, but they are, in extremis, the things that keep human beings alive. And in a situation where the alternative is death, keeping human beings alive is the only form of value that matters. The question is not whether this could happen. History proves it has happened. Repeatedly. Across cultures, across centuries, across every type of society. The question is whether the conditions that led to those collapses could emerge again. And whether, if they did, you would understand the pattern in time to respond. Most people never see these patterns until it's too late. That's why this channel exists. Not to predict the future, but to autopsy the past, so that when history rhymes, as it always does, you will recognize the rhythm. The pattern is already in motion. The only question is whether you can see it.